Well, look at that. Types of U.S. customs entries. So any organization bringing goods into the U.S., they have to file a customs entry, and you do require a broker for that, as we just discussed. There are a lot of different forms or formats that an entry can take. There's the formal or informal customs entry. Formal meaning that it is a shipment that is above $2,500 in value, or you also have to have a formal entry if you have an item that is subject to Section 301 and I believe also Section 232 duties. Even if you have an item that's under $2,500 in value, if you are subject to Section 301 additional duties from lists 1, 2, 3, or 4A, you still have to file a formal entry even though your value is low. And the reason for that is customs looks at those entries more closely, and they also want to make sure that they are getting the full amount of duties and taxes from those particular entries. The next entry type is going to be warehouse or FTZ. The purposes for a warehouse or an FTZ entry, there's quite a few, especially with FTZ. So FTZ is called Foreign Trade Zone. And basically what that is it's a bonded warehouse, which allows you to bring your cargo into the US and place it in this warehouse and not have to pay duties and taxes immediately. It's sort of a stopping point for your cargo, and it kind of sits there in kind of outside of time for CBP. You don't have to pay duties and taxes until that item is entered into what's called the commerce of the U.S. So while it's in that foreign trade zone, it's basically like it's not in the United States at all. Same thing with the warehouse. You enter something into a warehouse, and then you don't pay duties and taxes on it until you withdraw that item from the warehouse and it enters the commerce of the U.S. Another type of entry is a temporary importation bond. Let's say you have something that you're bringing in for testing. It's a combine, and you want to test it in different areas of the U.S. And you bring it into Kansas, and then you bring it over to Iowa, and you test it in a couple of different areas, but you're not really planning on leaving it in the U.S. That might be something that we are able to file a temporary importation bond. Something to be aware of is there are very specific requirements on temporary importation bonds. So you need to make sure that before you just plan on doing one of those, you actually know the regulations. And obviously you can come to Scarborough for that. We can advise you whether or not that's something that's advisable or possible. Personal effects entries is pretty much what it sounds like. So let's say you moved from Italy over to the US and you're trying to bring all of the things that you owned over there. That can be an overwhelming process, especially since you have so much stuff. Normally when an item enters the country, you have to have an exact harmonized tariff code for it, an HTS number. In the case of personal effects, there's a tariff for just broad personal effects, which allows you to basically bring in all of your personal goods, with some exceptions, into the country. And those are a little more difficult to deal with simply because customs is not familiar with you as an individual usually. And so we have to deal with different types of regulations on those. And that's just something that I would definitely encourage you to work closely with your broker on if you decide to do that. Next up is a carnet. This is kind of like a temporary importation bond, but it's usually described as a passport for your freight. So if you have, let's say, trade show goods, and they're out of Argentina, Argentina would actually, I think Argentina does not participate in that program, so I'm not going to use them as an example. Let's use India. India is part of the Carnet program, I believe, and goods manufactured in India, let's say they're sending them to a trade show in the US, and then after the trade show in the US, they've got another trade show in the UK. Instead of exporting those goods to the US, filing entry, paying duty on them, what that allows you to do is to move it into the US duty-free, and then upon exit from the US, it goes over to the UK, and we just file it, and it gets kind of like a stamp on the passport. There's more paperwork involved to it, obviously, but that's kind of the general idea of what a carnet is. So obviously, as you can see, the type of entry is determined by the commodity and what the goal is of the shipment. Is the goal for it to end up in the US? Is it coming to the US for remanufacture? That's just a bunch of things to take into account if you're bringing something into the country.